Welcome back to this week's episode of Lindsay Byrd in Writing is Hard. This week is all about chronic illness and writing disabilities, but specifically in a horror comedic setting. Where's the balance? And also, why choose horror comedy as one way to discuss this topic? I hope you enjoy. Today's interview is with Grace Daly. Grace is a disabled author with multiple invisible chronic illnesses. She usually writes horror, fantasy, and sci-fi that includes some comedic elements. She lives near Chicago, Illinois, and spends most of her free time with her dog. Her debut novel, a horror comedy titled The Scald Crow, will be released with Creature Publishing on October 14th, 2025. Her fantasy novella, The Star of Kilmaley, will release with Bridget Gate Press in 2026. The Scald Crow's backup book blurb reads, Brige has had a rough go of it. Her mother abused her when she was little. Her best friend and secret crush is too busy chasing some blonde to answer Brige's calls, and she lost her job thanks to chronic pelvic pain with no identifiable cause. As a self-doubting, disabled adult, she's certain that everything that has happened to her is her fault. When her mother goes missing and Brige's only option is to move back into her childhood home in the idyllic Midwestern town of St. Charles, Illinois, the uncanny begins. A particular crow that once harassed her reappears, following her everywhere. A painting of Jesus keeps coming back no matter how many times she throws it away. Frozen body parts show up in places rubber band balls and door stoppers ought to be. Every night she dreams that her real mother is dead and decaying in the closet, and the identical mother who raised her is not her mother. But it's all in Brige's head. It's all her fault. It must be. What other explanation could there be? To survive, she'll need to ignore what her mother and her chronic pain doctors have always told her, that her perception of reality can't be trusted. So to start us off today, what inspired you to write this story?
So I wrote The Scald Crow to be the book that I needed when I was struggling without a diagnosis, in the hopes that it would help other people like me. I myself, as you mentioned in my bio, am disabled with chronic invisible illnesses. That took roughly from symptom onset about 15 years to get accurate diagnoses for. I still struggle with a lot of disabling physical symptoms to this day. I don't have like a full-time, air quotes, like real job because of my physical symptoms. But honestly, the thing that caused me the most like long lasting pain, and the thing that I've found very difficult to recover from, has been this, medical trauma, for lack of a better word, of spending so long pursuing diagnosis and having, doctor after doctor after medical professional dismiss me and tell me that I was being melodramatic, that I was healthy, that it was all in my head, that it was just anxiety, asking me if I had tried aromatherapy, if I had tried deep breathing, and when medical doctors, don't believe you, don't pursue it, when the test come back, results come back normal, and they just let it go, not only does the rest of society not believe you, but you start to not believe yourself. And it quickly becomes this really, really crushing weight. And so I wrote The Scald Crow to try to explore that feeling that I was struggling from, and to inspire folks who might have their own invisible illnesses and their own disabilities that they're struggling with getting diagnoses for, or they struggled for a long time to get a diagnosis. I wrote it for them so that they would hopefully see themselves in it and find like the strength and the determination to continue on.
One of the things that I think I've heard, because I've spoken to a few people who've experienced medical complications, disabilities, chronic illnesses in the past on this channel, is really getting that diagnosis, but then the journey to diagnosis is very unique and different for every single person. The amount of time, like, depending on the doctor, the accessibility to different healthcare services, to different tests, you might not be able to get that. And so it's not a word that I really hear applied so much to medical stuff, but there's almost a sense of gaslighting where you're being so convinced that you're definitely wrong. There's nothing wrong with you when obviously you're experiencing symptoms and yeah, like you said, you start doubting, am I actually making this up? And I think we see a lot of gaslighting as far as like applied to a partner or a family member trying to convince somebody of something, and we don't usually see it in the medical context, but I really like when you're describing it the way you were, it definitely had that same type of connotation to me while you were speaking.
Yeah, for sure. So it definitely, and from my lived experience, it definitely felt like gaslighting at the time, being told, you're fine, you're normal, you're healthy, when you can tell that you are not, and it's not your experience. And um, the thing that's so difficult is, of course, it's only officially gaslighting, like we only officially meet the requirements of the term when the person who's doing it knows what they're doing. But if a doctor is just, only has 15 minutes for your appointment, you're one of, like 27 people they're seeing that day,
Yeah.
they might not be doing it on purpose, but they don't have, and I'm not even saying that all doctors are bad people. I'm sure some of them are, but I'm sure some of them are doing the best that they can. But just realistically, like they accidentally end up mistreating patients and really not going in deep enough, because of the way that our medical systems are structured, and really just overloading these care teams, in a way that is just not sustainable and doesn't result in good outcomes for the healthcare workers or for the, chronically ill and disabled people, anyone who has a slightly complicated condition. But you're like 100% right from the patient's perspective. It feels like gaslighting. It has the same impact as gaslighting. Sometimes it really might be gaslighting. And I really do think that it is similar, as you point out, to, intimate partner abuse, or to, as the Scald Crow draws the parallel, child abuse. In the Scald Crow, Briege also has a history of child abuse that kind of primed her to accept this medical abuse from the practitioners and makes it feel to her like this uh instability of her reality is all around her and inescapable.
I haven't read your book yet, obviously because it hasn't come out yet, but, one of the, things when you were talking about it, with child abuse, in what way were you presenting it? Is this more of a manifestation of emotional abuse, or is this more of a physical abuse? And how is she reacting to it from that point? Because I do have a follow-up question depending on the style.
For sure. So in the Scald Crow, there is no child abuse on page. It is all like, kind of like remembered, and it's more just like illusions. So Briege is more feeling the adult effects of that, like chronic PTSD that, that's from her experiences when she was younger. And Briege's abuse has all emotional abuse. One of Briege's struggles in early in the book is that she struggles to even identify what she went through as abuse because there wasn't a physical element to it.
Yeah, that was honestly what I was guessing based on just how you were describing it because, there was a book that I had read recently, called Children of Emotionally Immature Parents,
I've
and
read that.
yeah, the way that children respond to, "Oh, well, this person is, they're the authority figure, that this is, I'm trying to either gain their affection or gain their attention." They start diminishing their own mental, beliefs or capacities because they're like, "Oh, well, I need to, make sure this person is happy all the time, and they're not gonna be happy if I'm struggling with a chronic illness, with my bodily complaints, whatever they are." And so I can see that absolutely in the description and also just the discussion we were having a moment ago with the doctors of if you're constantly trying to make other people happy while at the same time trying to figure out yourself, you gain this forced independence where you're trying to, just take care of everything, but at the same time you're doubting every step you take because obviously you're not good enough to take care of everything. That's why you're in this position. And so I'm curious, like as you were writing this, I mean, you just said that you did write or read that book. Did any of that specifically come in on page while you were discussing or creating this character?
Oh, for sure. And to your point, you were talking about how adults are, parents are authority figures to the child. Doctors are authority figures to patients, it's the exact same sort of setup where you are in this position where you need to appease, you need to grovel, you need to prove that you are worthy of their love, of their care, of their attention, that you're somehow special, and that you deserve this from them, when it's a situation where it's their job, it's a parent's job to care for their child, it's a doctor's job to care for their patient. And yet, because of the power dynamics at play, and because of the how many rights you lose when you're put in that position of like weakness, it really does force both children and chronically ill people into these very very narrow constraints. So yeah, that was very consciously done, and I really wanted readers to understand that that was a connection I was drawing.
Man, because like even like you said earlier, if a doctor only has 15 minutes, I even saw a sign once at a doctor's office that says you get one complaint. You can't talk about any of these other issues. You have to focus on one issue. For me, I read that sign, it's like, well, what if there are multiple symptoms coming together? Like, do I only focus on, oh, I had a fever last week instead I had a fever and then this odd rash? Like, maybe the rash isn't related. Am I allowed to talk about the rash? Maybe I'm not allowed to talk about the rash. And you start forcing yourself to become the perfect patient for the doctor. And maybe that also is doing yourself a disservice, but you're trying to just make it easier for them instead of being what's easier for you, which is where that power dynamic comes back into play, is trying to, how do you make yourself the best patient, the best person in the authority figures in your life?
Yeah, exactly. Wow, only allowed to make one complaint blows my mind. That feels like a way to guarantee that you're going to be making misdiagnoses.
Right?
Wow.
I
Yeah,
looked at
that,
it and I was just
that's
like,
incredibly bad.
I was like, look, I get it, but like, what if the period pain and the, heart palpitations are related? Like, would will you start
Seriously.
dropping
Yeah.
symptoms because maybe that's not related and I can't bring it like, and so it's an interesting when you get so crushed for time, how you start
Mhm.
losing stuff. And definitely like to pull it back into the fiction verse, it's where I think a lot of that horror and self-doubt and self-reflection really could come through on the page.
Yeah, for certain. I mean, a lot of the Scald Crow is Briege just existing in her own mind in this state of intense isolation. She actually interacts with other characters relatively little, especially like for a horror novel, which are usually, not usually, but often filled with like a lot of action and a lot of direct conflict. For the Scald Crow, a lot of the time it's just Briege existing in her own mind and trying to handle the quiet things that are happening around her and inside her body.
Writing perspective, how do you go about doing that type of actual production of the chapters then? I know for me, I love doing dialogue. So I love like making two characters interact. But if you have one character who's reflecting a lot, does it feel more diary-like? Does it feel, how do you actually put it onto the page to make it a compelling story for your readers?
For sure. So with Scald Crow, I used a little bit of, when I was writing it, I thought it was a cheesy trick, but now I've gotten a few reviews from early readers saying that they really thought it was unique and inventive. So one man's cheesy trick is another man's unique and inventive, I
We're
guess.
all little mice at the end chasing our cheeses.
But every chapter of the Scald Crow is a day. So, day one, she moves into her childhood home after her mother's disappearance and assumed death. And that's chapter one. Chapter two is day two. Chapter three is day three, on and on for the first 2 weeks. And then the last chapter is called day whatever. And you don't know how long it's been because something finally happened that allowed her to stop like keeping time in such a strict way. That being said, it doesn't read like diary entries. It reads very, I don't want to say stream of consciousness, because when I hear stream of consciousness, I think of like a story that's meandering and isn't like being propelled by plot. And that's not what's happening in Scald Crow. It's not just random meandering thoughts. I, I'm not trying to like dig at myself, but this is not literary. I don't have an MFA. This is not high art. It is plot driven. It is like a genre work. The best I would give it is maybe upmarket. But it is told in present tense, first person, and it is her thoughts and her immediately reacting to her surroundings as they are occurring to her, split out by day. And it's also split out, as I said, she moves into her abandoned childhood home at the outset of the book. And it is also split out as her trying to complete various chores through the house, and things keep going wrong.
Did you have a favorite scene while you were splitting it all up into these different days, or like one scene that really stands out to you as like this one is my favorite?
So there is my favorite like comedy scene that's really not horrifying at all, and then there's like my favorite horror scene. Um, my favorite, I'll start with horror and then we'll end light. Um, so my favorite horror scene is actually not any of the, for lack of a better word, haunting things that happen. But my favorite horror scene is actually one of the moments where her illness flares very, very badly. And she is having a lot of like women's health gynecological issues. I don't want to reveal exactly what the health problem is because it's a part of the book. But one of her symptoms is intense, intense pelvic pain and incredibly heavy vaginal bleeding. And in one scene, she's woken up in the middle of the night from the intensity of the pain and from having all this sticky blood in between her legs. It's, all over her sheets, her comforter. It's soaked through almost to the mattress. She's in so much pain, she can hardly stand. She's bleeding excessively. She crawls into the bathroom, turns on the shower, stuffs a whole bunch of weed edibles in her mouth, lies on the bath mat while she's waiting for the water to heat up because she can't stand, leaves a puddle of blood on the bath mat, crawls into the shower, and then like lies on the floor of the shower against the wall and is just watching the blood trickle out from between her legs as the water hits her. And then out of curiosity, through like the weed haze and all the pain and all of this brain fog she's experiencing, she just does like a Kegel. Like she just squeezes her pelvic floor muscles. And as she squeezes them, she sees the blood just like bullet out through her legs. And I wrote that because it's something that happened to me like multiple times. And in the scene when she does it, it's this horrible, horrible, visceral thing. But from her perspective, she finds it a little funny because for her, it's a Tuesday, you know? And I wrote it because I knew it's something that I've experienced, dozens and dozens of times. And it was something that I knew a reader would find so gross and so graphic and so upsetting. But I could really underline the like, no, like this is what living with undiagnosed, unmanaged chronic illness and disability can be like. You just have to accept the horror and then you have to do the laundry because there's blood on your sheets and no one else is going to do your laundry for you. So that was my favorite horror scene. My favorite comedic scene that didn't have like any horror elements to it all, though I do have some scenes that are both scary and funny, but there's one scene that's in my mind just pure comedy. And it's when she goes and she adopts her cat, Koo, who, if you look at the cover, he's on the cover. He's everyone's favorite character, including mine. And she goes to a cat rescue and she adopts her cat. And she meets like effectively a used car salesman, but for cats. He is this ultimate, in my mind, Midwestern American character, this older white guy wearing an American flag shirt with a handlebar mustache who talks in these over the top, overly effusive, like verbose, just kind of word vomit about how wonderful the cats are. And he's pushy and he's a little aggressive, but in a very friendly way. And I really feel like I just captured a person who only exists in this very specific pocket of the world and only at a cat rescue, you know? And so he's based off of a real person, the real man that I adopted my cat from. And I wish I knew his name. I wish I could find him. Because he was so singular of a person, and he made it into my book, and he is a delight.
That sounds genuinely lovely. I'm not gonna lie. I've got this perfect image of my in my head right now of what he looks like.
I have never met his equal.
The only thing I could think of is like the Cat Whisperer. I don't know if you remember that TV show. It was on.
Oh, a Jackson Galaxy?
Yes, him.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So very similar Jackson Galaxy energy, but Jackson Galaxy, first off, goes by Jackson Galaxy and seems to know that he's strange. Um, Handlebar mustache American flag shirt man is entirely convinced that he's normal. And if you treat him like he is strange, he will act confused by you. Why are you making this weird?
Perfectly logical to me. Like, yeah, that fits. That tracks perfectly.
He's the normal one. He doesn't know what
Absolutely.
everyone else's problem is.
So your book is a horror comedy, as you just described two different scenes, horror and comedy. How do you imagine the balance between horror and comedy playing out? Especially because they're two seemingly diametrically opposed concepts. But how do you bring them together to create a cohesive story?
In my mind, horror and comedy aren't diametrically opposed opposites because they both share something that also horror and romance share. And I don't consider horror and romance diametrically opposed either, even though many people do. And it is that they are genres that are defined by their reliance on evoking a true emotional response from the reader. They don't rely on, the cleverness of a twist. They don't rely on the intricacy of the character interactions or the beauty of the language or the gorgeous themes or the poetry or a reflection on the nature of humanity. I'm not saying that it can't contain those things, horror or comedy or romance for that matter. They could contain all those things. But what really defines those genres is the true evocation of emotion. And if you're not able to truly evoke a feeling of like fear or disgust or revulsion or dread um, in a horror novel, then you haven't really successfully written a horror novel. And if you're not able to evoke those feelings of humor, mirth, delight, bemusement in a comedy, then you haven't really written a comedy. And this is part of what makes these genres so difficult is they are so subjective. One reader's terrifying horror is another reader's nothing happened in this book. Um, so, and so they are very subjective and they are very fiddly in that way. It's really about like drawing this human connection between reader and author. And so I don't think that they're diametrically opposed because no matter what I'm doing, I'm still evoking emotion. I'm still trying to evoke that emotion. I'm still trying to draw that intense connection between me and the reader. I also think that things that frighten us are often ridiculous or silly. in the light of day or to another person. You know, one person's nightmare clown is another person's childhood entertainer. Snakes don't scare me. I think they're very cute and very boopable. But my mom is terrified of snakes. Like if she sees a picture of a snake, like a still image, she will close her eyes and turn away. So all it takes is like the concept of a snake, and she's repulsed. And I find that a little funny. And so there's, you know, there's also like a lot of inherent comedy in the concept of being scared. And then there's of course also that feeling of release after you've been frightened by something. Every time, you know, I've gotten spooked and then it turns out, you know, it's my dog, it's a weird lamp, you know, whatever. I always laugh after, right? I go, ah, and then I go, ah, you know, how silly. And it's your body wanting to return to equilibrium. You have this intense fear response. And then when you realize that you're not actually in danger, you have this intense, like, release of that emotion, often through laughter, often through that feeling of, you know, joy, relief, you know, like comfort. And so I do think that they hold hands for that reason as well.
Why did you feel like using horror comedy was the best genre to address chronic illness with?
So that one was a direct response to an issue I had after I wrote my very first manuscript. My first novel length manuscript had very similar themes. It was about chronic illness, it was about a woman who struggled to get her diagnoses, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't a comedy at all. And it was, in a word, a bummer. Um, it's not that it wasn't, you know, like a worthy book, and it's not even that I think it's not publishable, but it really had like a Kazuo Ishiguro almost vibe of being this very thoughtful, very, you know, more literary, introspective bummer of a book. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not Kazuo Ishiguro. I can't pull it off. I'm not that good. And nobody really wanted to read it. Like I just, not, again, not that it wasn't a worthy topic, but nobody was itching to read it, including me. I wrote it and then I was like, okay, now that's done. It just felt like it was done. And I sat there and I thought, you know, I wrote it for me a little bit too much. I made it to the point that there was no pleasure in it. There was only this brutal examination of suffering. And God, we're all suffering so much already. And so I thought, okay, how do I convey this same message in a way that people might actually want to read and in a way that's actually compelling? And then I thought, well, when I'm really talking about like my disability and my struggle with my friends, you know, and my friends who really care about me and my friends who don't mind listening to me talk about my disability and who are very supportive, how do I do it? And I thought, well, I'm funny about it. I'm lackadaisical, you know? Like I drop in jokes, and when they talk about their health issues, they drop in jokes, you know? It's We're not seriously discussing, you know, the fecal incontinence that comes with chronic digestive problems. You know, we're calling each other and we're like, "Hey, I shit my pants today." You know, and it's funny. There's inherent humor in it. And so I thought, "Oh, duh, if I want to write about chronic illness and disability in a way that, you know, people are going to really connect with and really want to read and enjoy, you gotta give them something pleasant." And that's really what encouraged me to do it.
Honestly, that's been my experience with my friends who have dealt with various medical and also personal traumas and stuff. Like when you're telling stories about this stuff, by and large, we're not sitting there like this is the horrible thing that happened, and I want somber reflection upon this horrible thing that happened. And I appreciate you giving me your empathy and your silence in this time. Like, usually it's like, all right, so here's the story. And you end up,
Exactly. Exactly.
and
I
there's
think
nothing.
some Oh, sorry.
No, 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 go ahead.
Oh, I think some of the ad copy that came out for Scald Crow said something like told in the voice of a trusted best friend. And that is how I tried to make Briege talk. I tried to make it seem like Briege is your good friend and she's telling you about the nightmare days she's had.
Honestly, I think that's the highest praise. Genuinely. Like, because like that's who you want to hear your stories from. Like if I'm gonna get on the phone with somebody, I recently reconnected with a friend and I hadn't spoken to her for years, and we spent 4 hours just chatting. And it was just like, here are the horrors that have happened for the past 4 years. But we were laughing the entire time. Like they were the horrors, but at the same time, like when we got done with it, it was like, I can't wait to talk to you next week. And then we did it again, another 4 hours the week afterwards. And I think that's it forms connection between you and the reader or the character, because as a reader, you're like, this is somebody I can just talk to or listen to or hear from, and I can receive that information, process it, and be like, you know what, same girl. And be like, I've been there, or I know that, or I understand, or like, yes, you get it. And so I think having somebody say that, or the trusted best friend, like that's honestly very high praise. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. That's very thank you very much. That's very nice. I will warn you that sometimes when you're reading the Scald Crow though, and you read what Breeze chooses to do, you go, girl, no.
But that's also your best friend. It's your
Yeah, it's also
job
your
to like
best.
sit there and be like the voice
Girl,
of reason.
no.
Like, unfortunately, you weren't on that bathroom call. You were just like, no, wait, come back.
Ooh.
So, um, we've talked a lot about chronic illness and the way that it can appear in a book. For you in particular, why do you believe it's important to have more stories that are discussing disability representation in novels that we're picking up these days?
So there are a lot of reasons. For me, number one reason is that disabled representation increases empathy for disabled folks, both from able-bodied people who don't have disabilities or chronic illnesses, but also crucially for the disabled folks themselves. Like any minority group, it's really important for disabled people to see themselves in stories so that they can fully engage with them, but also so that they don't limit themselves, that they see themselves as full people with stories that are worth telling and with stories that are worth sharing. It helps elevate the disabled person into a status of full personhood and into a status of like belonging in the larger community when they are featured as the main character of a story. We as humans communicate through stories. They're very important to us culturally. And so when an entire group of people is just fully, you know, dismissed, fully ignored, or reduced in like very reductive ways, which is often what you see in disabled representation, it makes those people seem less than the other majority group people. And so to make sure that disabled people aren't less than, I think it's important that we, elevate them to the same level of esteem as we do our other main characters.
It's important that you mention that there's been a lot of reduction when it comes to how people with disabilities are portrayed in on page, on screen in general. Because I remember growing up, many, many, many stories, if they had a character that had some sort of disability, they were either a joke or a villain of some kind, or their disability made them some sort of evil creature that was going to, prey on others somehow. Their mental illness was, the reason they were going to start murdering folks. And so the disabled were cast as this group of people to either be feared, pitied, or mocked. And I have seen more and more really good examples of people showing, no, you don't have to be feared, pitied, or mocked. You can just be a person. For you personally, is there any story, you can name names or not name names, it's your preference, that really stands out as like a really good representation of disability representation? Or even just ways that characters you think, if somebody's going to be writing those particular characters, things that they should keep in mind while they're writing that type of disability representation?
For sure. So, to start with things that people should keep in mind, you hit the nail on the head saying don't make the disability the source of the horror or the source of, why they do bad things. I don't think that every disabled character needs to be a good person. That is also reductive. Disabled people are jerks at about the same rate as everyone else, because we're people. And so I'm not necessarily saying your disabled person needs to be a great person 100% of the time, or else it's bad representation. But they need to be a whole person. Their disability can't be the only trait they have, and it can't be, and it shouldn't be the source of the horror. It shouldn't be the source of their villainy, or at least it shouldn't be the only source of their villainy. It shouldn't be disabled, therefore bad. Um, Another thing to keep in mind is a lot of people often will write disabled characters who exist in a wretched state to only suffer, so that they are only pitied, so that they are only, these wretched creatures that we look down upon. That's also bad. A lot of disabled people, do eventually. Breege suffers a lot in the Scald Crow, to be clear, and chronic pain is difficult, and chronic illness is difficult. And I'm not saying it isn't difficult, and I'm not saying that I don't suffer, but I don't only suffer. I also experience joy. I also experience love. I also experience minor irritation. I get angry. I get sad. I laugh. I swear. I have a full range of emotions and a full range of human experience. And your disabled characters need to have that too. The other thing to look out for, and this kind of goes back to your disabled characters don't have to be good necessarily, is sometimes you see disabled characters exist to inspire able-bodied characters, either by getting killed or by being, so great and overcoming their disability to walk to the grocery store or do other, everyday stuff. And then it'll inspire an able-bodied character, or it'll inspire the reader. And we don't love that either. Disabled people are people. They are just going to the grocery store. They are just living their lives. And they shouldn't be held up as like inspiration, and they also shouldn't be murdered to motivate the main character to avenge them. They again, whole people. That's the main thing to keep in mind when you're writing a disabled character. It's an entire character, fill them out. Don't just label a cardboard cutout disabled. That's the main thing to keep in mind. Some of my favorite representation, especially in horror, I tried to keep it to horror because I am a horror writer. But Zoya Stage's Baby Teeth, which was a big hit when it came out. I never hear people talking about the main character as disabled, which blows my mind, because to me it is like a fundamental cornerstone of the character. The main character in that book, the mother character, is named Suzette, and she has Crohn's disease. And in like the first or second chapter, it's established that one of the reasons, or the main reason why she's a stay-at-home mom, is because she couldn't work full-time due to her symptoms of her Crohn's disease. And boy, howdy, if that's not disability, I don't know what is, because it's alluded to and it's made clear in the story that before her symptoms got so bad that she had to stop working full time, she was a very successful and talented artist. And she, you know, her husband, who's an architect, even, you know, requests her assistance on his projects, on his design. She's very talented, she's very skilled, but her disability makes it so that she can't have a job in the traditional workforce despite her clear talents. And it's really relevant to the plot. It comes back again and again. It's very relevant to her character. It's presented in a very realistic way. Zoya Stage herself is disabled, so she did a really good job writing that its own voices. And so, yeah, Baby Teeth by Zoya Stage is one of my favorite horror disability horror examples. The other one, I know some people will probably come at me saying that this is dark fantasy, not horror. Fight me. Guillermo del Toro's Shape of Water. Eliza in Shape of Water. Eliza? I think it's Eliza. Anyways, she isn't able to speak, and she has the scars on her neck. And in the story, it's said that she was found that way. And so she communicates through sign language, through American Sign Language. And it ends up being, again, incredibly relevant to the plot because she speaks to the amphibious man. Using sign language, she's able to communicate with him in a way that no other character is able to. And she's some really great representation. I mean, talk about a well-rounded character who's got her motives, who does, you know, who does things that like are clearly motivated by this wide spectrum of human emotion, who's got this really, really full-fledged story. You can see the way she struggles with her disability, but that she still has a full life. I love Eliza in Shape of Water. And then a quick little honorable mention. Again, we're still just keeping to horror. I could go for days, but keeping to horror. Ash's chainsaw hand in Evil Dead. You know, lose a hand, slap a chainsaw on there, bada bing, bada boom, you're good to go. Gotta love it. You gotta love it. It's iconic.
It's funny because, like, while you were mentioning these, there are a couple things I thought of as weird, like, not responses, but like, for instance, in the Netflix Witcher TV show, they had a deaf character for all of 30 seconds who showed up on screen, was doing sign language, and I was like, I saw him and I was like, you're gonna die in the next 30 seconds. And he did. Because it was like over and over and over again. It's like, oh, here's the, disability rep. We've done it. We can check that box off. Dead in 30 seconds. All right, we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to pay the actor to do sign language. We don't have to explain it. We can just move on. But to show the difference between that representation versus Shape of Water is a huge difference of how you can just show
Huge.
sign language, and death is different from mutism, but at the same time, it's showing two different ways of looking at something. And then when you mentioned the chainsaw hand, I distinctly remember online discourse of people for Fullmetal Alchemist saying that Ed wasn't disabled. And it's like, he's missing an arm and a leg. And it's like, no, but he's got prosthetics. That doesn't count. And it's like, just because you have very good prosthetics doesn't mean you're not disabled. And it's
You're not disabled.
and I've
Yeah.
seen the same thing with Bucky Barnes for the Marvel universe. And people are like, well, he's not disabled. He's like, he's missing an entire arm. It's like, but he's got the fake arm. And it's like, no, but that like, there's a disconnect sometimes where people,
Yep.
if you have a prosthetic that looks cool and, does everything, clearly you're not disabled anymore. You've magically bumped out of that, entire genre of experience. And it's fascinating how there's still that disconnect sometimes when it comes to understanding what it means to be a person who's living with a disability.
Well, because disabled people are, you know, ugly and horrifying and pitiable, and at their best, they serve as inspiration. Duh, you know, obviously I'm being sarcastic. People really hesitate to equate these like, you know, like attractive, masculine, strong characters with disability. They act as if they're mutually exclusive, and they're not.
And it's this lack of comprehension of like, well, if he can do everything that a normal person can do, normal in quotation marks, then obviously the disability doesn't matter anymore. He's not actually disabled. And it's like, no, that's not how that works. And also, there are many moments in Full Metal Alchemist in specific where you show like if he gets too cold, suddenly he can't move. Like even for Bucky Barnes, he loses an arm. Like that's a whole scene of like them losing the arm, and like suddenly he's no longer as strong for whatever reason. It's a very weird dynamic in those movies. But it's like they create these systems of we're going to present this in a specific way, and if you can pretend you're not actually disabled, or ignore the disability just for the art of the show, but we created the illusion. It's an interesting way of showing these types of disabilities where people don't really understand what it actually is like to live like that.
For sure. And that connects really well with like chronic invisible illness, right? Because Briege has this experience, and this is very much my experience because I'm invisibly disabled, where people don't realize that I'm disabled because they can't see my pain, they can't see my bowel problems, they can't see the way that I'm struggling to ambulate. And because they can't see it, they just imagine it doesn't exist. And like, I'm not really disabled. Oh, but I'm not like those disabled people. Yes, I am. Like, very, very much so. And we really, as a society, need to move away from this very outdated, very limited understanding of what disability is. And to bring it back to Scald Crow, I really hope Scald Crow helps do that. I hope that I con some able-bodied people into picking it up because they like horror comedy, and I hope that they put it down and they've got a new way of thinking about disability and chronic illness that they didn't have before.
I definitely think from what we've discussed, at least so far, that definitely open that discussion, and I hope it's something that your readers will take away from it because it sounds like it's a really important discussion that they need to have. We're running a little low on time, but I wanted to ask you before we left, is there anything we haven't had a chance to talk about today that you would like to talk about?
I just want to close out. This is something that I love to share wherever I can. I know a lot of people really want to be supportive of people in their life who have chronic illness and who are disabled and who are struggling and don't know how to do it. They feel awkward, they feel uncomfortable, they just don't know what to do. And so they end up not saying anything. They end up pretending that the disability isn't there, that the chronic illness isn't there, because they think that that's the best way to support the person that they care about. And often that can make the chronically ill person feel like nobody cares about their chronic illness, feels like it can feel like it's an off off limits conversation topic. And so I wanted to give your listeners a few tips on how to support somebody with a chronic illness. So, number one, especially if it's a chronic invisible illness, or they are having trouble getting diagnoses, or they're having trouble with their doctors taking them seriously, tell them you believe them. That's like the number one thing. And you don't have to, as we were talking about before, you don't have to somberly be like, I believe your lived experience. You can do it in a fun way, but yeah, if your friend is telling you how the doctor isn't listening to her, be like, yeah, girl, he sounds like a total tool, like tell them you believe them.
Just a quick question, because I've seen this online, but I don't have any experience of doing it in practice.
Mhm.
I've seen online someone say that if you have a witness that can either go with you to your appointments, sometimes having a second person who says, "No, I've seen her. She really is clinging to the toilet." Now there's somebody else there with you who can tell the doctor, like, "Oh no, this is actually something else. It's not just in her head. I feel it too. I've seen it too." I'm not sure if that's
Yes.
helpful or not.
So, yes, that is incredibly helpful. Before I had my diagnoses, I would strategically do that. Bonus points if you are a white man. And you do that. Bonus points if you're a white man and you can back up the person, because yes, that is hugely, hugely helpful. If there is another person there agreeing with the chronically ill person's like lived experience, that's very, very helpful. If the person you are talking to has a diagnosis, they do, you can educate yourself about their illness. I know I've had a couple friends before tell me that they looked up my various diagnoses and they'll be like, wow, that sounds so bad. Do you experience da 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 symptom? And wow, the love I feel knowing that they took time out of their day to like learn about what my lived experience is like. Wow, that feels so special. You know, be comfortable talking about their illness, share posts online about it if you're willing to try to help destigmatize chronic illness, try and talk about their disability or chronic illness the same way, you know, you would talk about any trait they might have, destigmatize it. Tell them they don't have to pretend to be healthy or pretend to be okay when they're with you. Tell them that when they're with you, they can, you know, act like they're in pain if they're in pain. You know, they can take off the mask. That's very, very helpful. And then finally, like, still invite them to things. Let them know that if they flare and they have to cancel last minute, that's okay. Or if there's any way to do it, and if you're feeling really generous, change your plans to make them be more accessible or offer to visit them. But isolation is a huge problem when you are disabled and chronically ill. It's a huge, huge, huge problem. And so if anything you can do to help your disabled, you know, friend, loved one, whatever, feel included and give them socialization is such a gift and is so generous.
It really is. And I think something else, if I may, just to add on, ask the person, is there something I can do for you? Is like, do you want me to acknowledge this or that? Is there something I can do? Like, if we're in public, do you want me to offer a hand or would you prefer not to be offered a hand? Because I know, for instance, some individuals do not want to be offered help. They don't want to be seen as needing assistance, where other individuals would really appreciate that. But the only way you're going to know is by asking and do it politely. Don't be like, "Hey, do you need help with that?" Um, like they come from a place of genuine care, but like I think a lot of my experience with my friends who are either chronically ill or have chronic pain is to be like, what can I do right now? Or even if you don't want to like put it all on them, it's like, I see that you might need help with this and this. Is that something I can do for you? And just see what you can do to, because everybody's different in how they're going to perceive or react to something. And just knowing their perspective from person to person might help just foster that care and appreciation of that person's own experiences.
100%. Yeah. As we were talking about before, you know, disabled people are full people. They have a full range of human emotions and experiences, and every person is different. So yeah, definitely, definitely ask them specifically what they'd like, what they'd need, and how you can support them.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it. It was a lovely conversation. It was so wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting. I had a really good time.
That's it for this week's episode of Lindsay Byrd and Writing is Hard. Grace Daly's book, The Scald Crow, is currently available. You can find out more about where to buy it in the description. If you enjoyed this content, please do like, share, and subscribe so we continue to bring you more. Bye for now.